Hello, and welcome back to Candle Sleep Tales. Before we begin, let me ask you something. If you died today, would you still want to vote tomorrow? Would your final ballot reflect your highest virtue or your oldest grudge? Take a moment. Let it sit. And if you find that question strange or troubling, good. That means you're ready for tonight's story. Now, if you enjoy tales like these, ones that lie somewhere between quiet horror, slow philosophy, and absurd realism, feel free to like, share, or whisper about it to someone who listens to ghosts. Tonight's story is called How the Dead Vote in the Republic of Vale. It is not fiction in the world of Vale. It is policy. And policy, like all things in Vale, has teeth. Chapter 1. The Vale in Quiet Decline. The Republic of Vale awakens slowly. Its mornings creak open like ancient cabinets, reluctant and dust-veiled. The air carries the scent of long unlit stone, and even the wind moves with hesitation, careful not to disturb the parchment, thin quiet that clings to the city's bones. From a distance, Vale appears solemn and stately, rows of domed buildings arranged like chess pieces in repose, their facades carved from a soft greenish limestone quarried from the riverbeds below. Most lean ever so slightly, their joints eroded through a long inheritance of indecision and stillness. Ivy threads upward across the columns of every civic structure. The Ministry of Inheritance, the Office of Ritual Architecture, the Grand Record Hall. The Ministry of War, decommissioned after the Quiet Accords 3 generations past, now serves as a public bathhouse where the elderly bathe in silence beside statues of forgotten generals. The streets are paved in whisperstone, a locally quarried slate chosen for its ability to muffle footsteps. Reverence shaped this design. In Vale, the dead receive more than remembrance. They are recorded, archived, and, when required, consulted. Among these legislative mausoleums and weather-softened colonnades, the concept of the final franchise took form. In Vale, death does not sever the responsibilities of citizenship. To vote is a declaration of one's stance in shaping the world. Those who have departed are seen as voices of lasting clarity, unshaken by the tides of living fear or fashion. The custom began quietly. A clause was affixed to the mourner's charter during the Turn Reformation, allowing next of kin to cast a vote on behalf of the recently deceased, provided clear intent had been recorded. Letters evolved into notarized oaths, and oaths into the practice of spiritual scribing. A sanctioned ritual by which the dead, acting in civic capacity, may submit their will directly. To accommodate this, a neutral order of ritual officiants was created. These were the grave clerks. Their offices stand adjacent to cemeteries, their uniforms deep violet trimmed in soot-colored lace. They carry censers not in prayer, but to modulate the veil between breath and stillness. The smoke, blended from myrrh and root dust, eases transitions. At dusk, one might observe a grave clerk walking slowly through a side street, head slightly bowed, a lead wood ballot box strapped to the back of a skeletal mule. Each election cycle, the ritual of declaration is performed in all 13 precincts. Bodies are retrieved respectfully from their crypts. To be eligible, a corpse must remain sufficiently intact to exhibit gesture, strain, or minimal breath in response to a spoken name. This standard is literal. The grave clerk reads a candidate's name aloud, pauses, then repeats. If the body stirs at the second reading, a tilt of the chin, the soft creak of a knuckle, a thread of breath no warmer than paper, the vote is counted. A third silence is recorded as abstention. The process is administered not as sacred rite, but as civic duty. Grave clerks maintain ledgers. Ballots undergo sensory validation. The candidate's name must be inscribed in ash ink, placed beneath the tongue of the deceased, and retrieved intact. Other inks, charcoal, vine black, iron press, fail to meet the necessary standard. Only residue drawn from final fire will suffice. Ballot boxes, lined in lead, bear the inscription, Nulla vox perit, no voice is lost. In some districts, the dead now outnumber the living. Their votes arrive with unwavering regularity, preserving traditions the breathing might otherwise allow to fade. Slogans are chiseled into stone, hung from cemetery gates, whispered into ossuaries. A visitor may regard this as grotesque. Within Vale, it is structure continued. Life prepares the vote. Death delivers it. And to belong to Vale is to believe, not in gods or in progress, but in the dignity of a design that outlives its designers, even when the hands that raised the ballot have long since turned to paper. Chapter 2. The Ritual of Declaration. To observe the ritual of declaration is to witness a nation in dialogue with its own absence. The ceremony begins before dawn, when the city still holds the silence of unspoken decisions. In each of Vale's 13 precincts, a bell of low copper is rung once, not to summon the living, but to notify the departed that their moment has come. The bell's tone is designed with care, a single sustained note, neither mournful nor proud, tuned to a frequency once tested against the breath of sleepers in the city infirmary. It does not awaken the dead, for in Vale they are never truly considered asleep. Rather, it signals readiness. Each precinct maintains a chamber of civic return, a hybrid between archive and mausoleum. These chambers are housed beneath civic halls and administrative courts, windowless structures built with stone so thick the temperature never shifts. Inside, the air is dry and faintly metallic, like parchment left too long beside ink. Shelves of shallow niches line the walls, each bearing a single nameplate and an embossed seal verifying the bearer's status. Eligible for franchise. When the clerks enter, they do so without pageantry. Their movements are slow, unhurried, a choreography learned through years of practice. They wear no ceremonial masks. Their robes are plain, the deep violet of civic neutrality. The only adornment is the strip of soot-colored lace at the collar, a symbol not of mourning, but of administrative burden. Each clerk carries a censer suspended from a chain of brass. The smoke it releases is pale and bitter, compounded from resin, bark, and myrrh ground to a dust finer than salt. This is not incense in the sacred sense, but an olfactory ledger, a reminder that what occurs is bound by contract, witnessed by state, and answerable by record. Before the bodies are consulted, their ballots must be prepared. Each is crafted by hand on archival vellum, inscribed with the candidate's name using ink mixed from soot, lime, and blood ash. The ink must be harvested from a final flame, meaning it has touched a body or the remnants of one. This requirement is not symbolic. Tests conducted by the Ministry of Verification have shown that only this ink resists smudging under cold breath. When the time arrives, the body is brought from its niche and placed upright on a steel frame known as the listener's rack. This is not a restraint device, but a posture aid designed to keep the spine straight and the head slightly bowed. Some remain in their burial clothes. Others are dressed in simple grey shifts provided by the precinct. No one speaks. The clerk kneels. They remove the ballot, fold it once, and place it beneath the tongue of the deceased. Then the name is read aloud, slowly, once. The air is watched. A second reading follows, identical in tone. At this point, motion is expected, a tremble at the fingertips, a faint shift at the jawline, a pulse of air from within the ribs. If the body stirs, even by the width of a sigh, the vote is counted. If there is no motion after the third reading, the ballot is removed and marked, abstained. This is not considered failure. Not all who die wish to remain involved. Consent remains paramount. The process is meticulous. Each ballot is preserved in a lead-sealed case, marked with the voter's name, time of response, and verification of gesture. In cases where the corpse displays ambiguous motion, a finger tapping with irregular rhythm, a jaw clenching without breath, the ballot is brought before a review circle composed of 5 senior clerks and 1 neutral mourner. Their judgment is recorded in public ledger and copied into the Grand Archive. Outsiders have asked whether this system is open to manipulation. The answer, always, is yes. But the same is true of any vote cast in breath. Manipulation, however, is discouraged by ritual design. The smoke, the silence, the ink, each element exists not to glorify death, but to slow the living. To require of them a patience that cannot be faked. For the dead do not rush. And to interpret their will requires waiting for the precise moment when silence becomes decision. By midday, the precincts begin closing their chambers. The bodies are returned to their niches, ballots sealed and delivered by mule or archivist to the central counting house beneath the Ministry of Record. There, beneath frescoes of unbroken chains and weeping hourglasses, the votes are tallied by candlelight. And so, by dusk, the Republic of Vale once more knows what its dead have said. Chapter 3. The Silent Majority. Births, deaths, and ballots share the same parchment, a citizen's civic arc measured in the steady geometry of ledgers. Over time, a fact emerged from these records. The living of Vale had begun to dwindle. Slowly at first, then with statistical clarity. Fewer children, fewer marriages, more departures without return. Illnesses went unnamed. Apprenticeships went unfilled. Still, the numbers at the voting box grew with unwavering consistency. In 6 of the 13 precincts, the dead outvote the living. This is precise. In the northern districts of Lorne and Berrigal, over 70% of votes cast in the last national election came from corpses. In East Chapel, 92%. In Dross Vale, a perfect 100. Campaigning has changed. Canvassers now walk the cemetery paths, placing weatherproof messages near stones worn smooth by decades of rain. Speeches are delivered aloud in ossuaries, where echoes are swallowed. The atmosphere favors persistence over passion. Political slogans are crafted to endure across seasons and soil. The convictions of the dead remain constant. A vote cast by the breathing might bend to scandal or public fervor. A vote cast in stillness adheres to the convictions carried into the grave. One who died believing in agricultural subsidy reform will, in legislative consequence, continue that belief across generations. Political movements that have withered among the living persist in Parliament through loyalty laid down in coffins. The People's Table, a once fringe party of grain tax moderates, maintains its parliamentary presence through the unshifting support of its funerary base. Criticism exists, though it must be offered with caution. To question the political authority of the dead does not violate law, but unsettles custom. Families hold vigils during elections in gestures of respect. A man may kneel beside his grandfather's grave in acknowledgement of a decision that will soon be counted. Among the living, discomfort grows. Concerns circulate about civic consent, locked in stasis, about dialogue reduced to a single, unyielding voice. Some scholars have begun to ask whether the Republic still functions as a government or has become a sanctuary of preserved intent. One professor published a treatise titled Ghosts as Governance, a study in quiet tyranny. Her name remained on the rolls, but her public invitations slowly disappeared. Subtle signs of resistance emerge. A bakery window in South Lois bears a sign, "Bread for the breathing." A mural in Westwalk shows a woman debating a skeleton across a ballot box. In libraries with broken lamps and disordered shelves, the young speak of voting once and never again. Some make plans to depart, others have already gone. Vale enforces no decree. Its power accumulates through ritual and habit. Its silence lingers. The slowness of its ceremonies compresses the present beneath the weight of the recorded past. People obey because the structure remains too intact to ignore. Screams may rise from the living districts, fierce and fleeting. Yet in Vale, decisions come from those whose voices require no breath. And so the elections continue. The ballots arrive. The counting proceeds. The lights remain steady in the chambers beneath stone. The silence holds. Chapter 4. Contesting the Grave. The dispute began without protest. It was recorded first as a procedural note, buried in the weekly digest of the Ministry of Verification. One abstained ballot reclassified following testimonial review. No fanfare accompanied the change. No announcement left the archive. Yet, within a month, the entry had drawn petitions, counter-petitions, and a formal challenge submitted to the High Civic Tribunal. The case was titled, "In re. Holden Firth, deceased." Holden Firth had died 8 years prior, survived by 2 sons, a sister, and a record of 27 cast ballots, all verified and responsive under ritual terms. He had voted consistently in favor of agricultural protections and regional autonomy for the hillside provinces. The reclassified ballot, submitted in his name during the recent election, endorsed a slate of policies favoring consolidation under Vale's Central Revenue Board. The motion had passed by a narrow margin, and the dead Firth included had tipped the outcome. His sons, both registered citizens, submitted an affidavit claiming misrepresentation. Their father, they stated, had expressed clear and repeated disgust for central taxation. They provided handwritten notes, dated field reports, and a single surviving will clause. None of this documentation aligned with the vote on record. The grave clerk, who had conducted the ritual of declaration for Firth, stood by the outcome. 3 gestures had been observed: a shiver across the left index finger, a lifting of the chin, and a faint rise in abdominal tension. All were catalogued, timed, and witnessed. Disputes of this kind were not unheard of. Misreading the body was always possible. Reflexes persisted beyond breath. Grief could bias interpretation. The tribunal summoned the Record Circle, an advisory panel consisting of 3 senior archivists, 1 neutral mourner, and a civic ethicist. Over 5 nights, the circle reviewed the gesture ledger, the ink fragments, and the body's final consent form. They interviewed the grave clerk under low-lantern scrutiny. No one raised their voice. The decision arrived sealed in wax, the ballot would remain valid. Following the ruling, protests began in the margins. Marginalia, on legislative transcripts, questioned the neutrality of clerks trained under ministry rotation. Anonymous essays circulated through university kitchens, speculating on the rise of false gestures. A junior official at the Office of Ritual Architecture resigned, citing an erosion of corporeal truth. Candles appeared at the edge of Firth's grave. Practical wax columns set there with slow hands. Signs followed, penned with care. I remember what he said. Consent requires clarity. The hand did not mean yes. In the chamber of civic debate, the matter escalated. A motion was introduced to establish a new right, the preemptive nullification oath. Any citizen while living could file a statement instructing the Republic to abstain on their behalf after death. Supporters argued this would protect civic autonomy. Opponents warned it would fracture the sanctity of continuity. The debate stretched through weeks of careful phrasing and perfumed paper. No shouting, no arrests, but every sentence held the weight of strain. A balance long held had shifted. The living, by volume, remained outnumbered. Their voices clustered close, while the silence of the dead hung diffused across centuries of precedent. When the motion came to vote, it passed in 2 precincts, failed in 9, and deadlocked in the remaining 2. The tiebreaker vote, cast by a body long interred beneath the Chamber of Commons, came 3 nights later. The grave responded with a creak of shoulder and a slow exhale. The ballot was counted. The preemptive nullification oath did not pass. The candles at Firth's grave burned until rain flattened their wicks. No statement followed. The grave clerk was reassigned. His sons did not attend the next election. And across Vale, a phrase entered the language of quiet rebellion: let the breath decide. Nothing cracked or shattered, nothing wailed. The city appeared unchanged, but in the wake of that weather, a courier arrived bearing a box with no seal. The courier wore no insignia, carried no papers, and gave no name. He entered the counting hall through the rear vestibule, where marble arches curved toward silence. The clerk on shift accepted the box with hesitation and signed the ledger out of habit rather than certainty. The courier turned and left without a word. Inside the box were ballots. Dozens, then hundreds. Each one folded precisely, written in ink that had not faded despite the damp. The paper bore no visible watermark, but the texture was familiar to the clerk's fingertips. These ballots contained names that did not match any living registry. Their dates of death, when listed, belonged to centuries outside the official calendar. No precinct claimed them. No grave marked their origin. The ballots were counted. The clerk followed every regulation. Verification of ink, parchment quality, crease alignment, breath response reaction test. Some ballots released a thin pulse of cool air when unfolded. One shifted on the desk, as if unsettled by its own clarity. A few contained signatures in an old civic script, no longer taught but still recognized. Word spread through the archive. No announcement was made. No breach was declared. The event never entered public record. But within days, protocols changed. Clerks began inspecting the sky for signs. Boxes arriving with water damage were given priority. The wind was monitored. Scholars proposed no theory. Journalists asked no questions. Even the ethicists who taught at the College of Civic Continuity avoided the topic. The event remained unspoken in official debate, but ballots continued to arrive, not by courier, but by drift. One washed up in a gutter near the Office of Wreaths. Another was found folded into the spine of a book, returned to the ministry library, decades overdue. A third was discovered in a teacup that had not been touched in years. Each was processed. Each was counted. The votes shifted the balance in 2 minor elections. An elder from Vale lost her seat after 16 years of uncontested service. A proposed ordinance to regulate archival access passed without a majority among the breathing. The pattern grew too large to dismiss, yet too shapeless to confront. A term emerged among the clerks: weather ballots. No regulation accounted for them. None forbade them. The Office of Verification prepared a statement, then filed it away. The High Tribunal held a closed session. No verdict was published. Grave clerks added a new line to their ritual ledger: external submissions logged. Provenance unknown. In private, among archivists and junior functionaries, a quiet question began to rise. Were these voices truly from the dead, or from those who had never lived at all? Vale offered no answer. The system endured. The count expanded. And when the next election came, the wind changed direction. Ballots arrived ahead of schedule. No clerk refused them. And so the Republic of Vale continued to listen, even to voices that had no names, even to breath that had never warmed a mirror. The stones remained dry. The lights remained steady. The silence endured. And the ballots, folded with perfect care, kept coming.